Okay, hello, good morning. Thank you for taking the time to sit down and attend this seminar. Can everyone hear me okay? Kind of competing with two other guys over there, but I think there's more of you here, so that's a good start. So my name's Toby, and I am the creative lead and LMS product manager at Saffron Interactive. But today I'm actually going to be talking about the dinosaur LMS. I'm going to be kind of rejecting, in a sense, the very premise of an LMS. And really, to do that, we were inspired by that anecdote about Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, who told his employees to kill their own business, to kind of undermine the very basis that they'd built Amazon on. And obviously, the result of that was the Kindle, which hasn't completely kind of wiped out the book, but it has changed the way that books are published and experienced by consumers. And so we wanted to do the same thing with the LMS, Learning Management System. We wanted to assume that an asteroid had impacted and wiped out all of those dinosaur LMSs. What would kind of emerge from the ashes? And that's really what this kind of seminar is about. What is a true successor in terms of a platform which will actually emotionally engage with employees? Of course, we have to acknowledge that the LMS isn't dead, and it's not going to be dead for quite some time, because it still performs many essential functions for administrators. So it still works for them. The problem is that the LMS just doesn't work for learners. And that's actually because a learning management system, it's almost in the name, was never designed for learners. It was designed really for short-term memory retention and long-term record of compliance data, or for rapidly deployed and rapidly forgotten learning. So instead of that, I'm going to be talking about how we can apply the principles of behavioral science to platform design, and how that allows us to create a place where learners actually have meaningful experiences of change. And in that way, a learning platform can be more than just an administrative system. It can actually be a change maker in an organization. And for that, we need different terminology. And that's why we're calling it the Learning Experience Network, is what we need. So I want to start with some kind of inspiration from a poet who very sadly recently left us, Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget the way that you made them feel. And I think this really cuts to the heart of the engagement problem that we have, because we focus far too much on what we say to learners, maybe how we say it, maybe what branding we've got on it. But we don't ever think about how they're feeling. And ultimately, feelings and emotions and emotional investment are at the heart of what we're trying to achieve. And that's our starting point. All learning platforms have an emotional footprint or not. Online environments do have an emotional footprint. So why does the LMS, maybe your LMS, I don't know, why does it feel so dead and lifeless to your modern contemporary learner? So you might say that the challenge facing the learning management system is a generational challenge. So, how many people here believe in kind of generational learning styles, that learning styles are different across the generations? Hands up. I think that, to some extent, it's very true. If you look at the huge leap that we've made between the generations and their expectations and how that affects every aspect of their lives, and fundamentally, the modern generations, and I would include the Generation X in this as well, it's almost that they expect to have meaningful interactions with technology. They are, as it says on there, they're technoholics. They're entirely dependent on this stuff. And so it's not really surprising that we're having difficulty engaging people with platforms that rely on a user interface which is, 10, 15 years old. So this is a website which many people use every day. It's the front page of the BBC, as I'm sure you can see from yesterday. And I think it's worthwhile to kind of take a look at what this front page looks like and what it does. You can see that this content is fundamentally driven by peer-reviewed data or comparisons with your peers. So it's about the most popular. It's about what's trending right now. The whole thing functions like that. Obviously, the interface feels more tactile. It feels more mobile. The BBC is constantly soliciting our content. We help to create the news where we interact with the news via Twitter. And it's also important to remember that the BBC is simultaneously a much-loved and trusted national institution, at the same time as being incredibly innovative in terms of technology and user experience. So, the first online TV streaming service in the world. Some of the features of this website here. And so this is what your learners are likely to see on a day-to-day basis when they log on to access some content, to do some learning, to discover something. And this is a industry-leading learning management system. This is a real deployment for a very large FTSE 100 company. And this platform is ranked in the top quartile, in the top right segment of the eLearnity 9 grid to assess the quality of these solutions. So this is the dinosaur LMS. It's not really kind of surprising that it's very difficult for learners to engage with a platform like this. It's not really giving anything to learners. It's almost quite alien, to be honest. You can tell it's been designed for administrators. So this is the problem that we have. This is what we need to address. And really the purpose of this seminar is to talk about how we can begin to address that problem almost in a step-by-step way based on 3 principles. And I'm going to run through examples of how each of those principles can be applied, just maybe even in a small way, to get away from this, a totally emotionally lifeless, dead LMS. A fossil, if you will. So to get there, we need to understand, well, how do websites like the BBC evolve? Like the websites we love and use, like services like Reddit, where we're, constantly on there, addicted to that. Well, to some extent, they're about the behavior of consumers, online consumers. And some of the theory and thinking around that is actually very useful for us as learning professionals. And this stuff hasn't really entered into the field of what we do in a sustained way yet. But there are 3 principles of behavioral science which have been demonstrated over and over again in behavioral economics experiments, and they're better at predicting what humans will do and what markets will do than any other model. So the first principle is this idea of peer comparison. Ultimately, peer comparison is the main reason we do anything on a day-to-day basis. We behave as other people behave. It's the reason I didn't, light up a cigar and open a beer when I got on the tube this morning. That's a behavior that I could just never do. It's also the reason why investment bankers continually strive to earn more money, even though they already have enough money. It's not that they want an absolute amount of money, it's just that they're competing with their peers. Now, that's one principle. The other idea that's very important to us is the framing effect. So this is the idea that you can determine the outcome of an experience before it happens, based on whether it has a positive or a negative frame. So I just want you to think about an example of interviewing someone where your co-interviewer has said, listen, I've done the initial one and this guy is really boring. That's going to color your entire interaction. And the final principle that we're going to look at and use today is the endowment effect. So this is the idea that a sense of belonging, or that something belongs to us, is the single most important motivator of human behavior. And if we're interested in being successful as learning professionals, we have to be interested in the things that motivate people to actually behave. So on an experimental level, they've demonstrated that if I'm given a coffee cup, told that's my coffee cup, and then asked to sell that on the open market and compare it against a coffee cup which is exactly the same, identical, but doesn't belong to me, people will put a higher value on the coffee cup that belongs to them. There's no reason for that apart from the fact that we're hardwired to think in terms of belonging, our possessions, the communities we belong to. It really is the main reason why people do anything. It's why the teams that you help train really, they do stuff because they care about the people around them more than anything else. So the first principle we're going to look at and how that can be applied to take our learning management system and turn it into a learning experience network is this idea of peer comparison. Quite simply, the behavior of others is the most powerful influence on our own behavior. So it's quite interesting from this perspective, especially in terms of learning, when in a classroom situation, it's commonly seen that the responsiveness of others, the response of a tutor is such an important part of the interaction that a learning management system almost leaves learners on their own. You know, they do some learning, there's no interaction, there's no ability to compare, you know, what they've done with anyone else. And so we're missing that whole factor, that's not there. So it's not about having the social experience as a separate learning activity. It's actually about making social integral to the activity, which is quite disconcerting to many people and is kind of viewed as a bit dangerous. So think about how you maybe discovered the last bit of content you were interested in. It was probably something like this. The way we discover and validate content tends to be based on peer comparison, because someone else has found that content. It's quite a simple idea, really, but we don't really give learners an opportunity to share what they have done once they've done it in any sense. I'm not saying they have to share it. You know, we probably wouldn't want to share it if we'd failed a compliance course. But maybe it was a soft skills course, so it was quite useful. Why wouldn't they want to share that? This is another way that we can build this idea of peer comparison into an online learning platform, into an online experience. Can be quite difficult to force people to engage in a forum to talk about why they're there and what they're doing in an asynchronous online environment. But quite a useful way is just to actually have a poll. You know, find out what people think about something and then show them where they are in relation to other people. For remember that idea that actually we kind of act and do stuff based on how we rate ourselves against other people, just giving that visibility is quite important. But something that's more fundamental about, you know, what we're calling the learning experience network is actually the idea that social shouldn't be separate in any meaningful sense. You know, just like the platforms people really use, you know, it's not separate. And so this is a kind of course format, if you will, where we have a SCORM package playing in one aspect, but we also have this constant chatter, this constant forum. It's adding that kind of social activation, that kind of social glue there, and tell people who the other members are on the course. You know, a lot of people go on external training courses mainly for networking. This is a big reason why people prefer still to go to classroom days over online alternatives, even though it might be, you know, more cost effective or easier, because they don't get that sense that they're able to network and learn from others. So we need to highlight that, and we need to bring it out. So what about this idea of framing, which is our second kind of principle? So effectively, when we talk about framing, what we mean is that the wrapping paper around content actually determines our response to that content. So again, a lot of people would like to think that content can stand on its own two legs. This is absolutely great content. The people will get past the fact that it doesn't look that good or no one's recommended it to them. Well, actually, that's not the case because, the studies have shown that the single most important factor on whether learning transfer will occur is the involvement of a manager prior to that training to say this is going to be important and useful to you. And, actually, it's because that frame will change the way people have an experience. Humans selectively confirm their prior consumptions. So having this kind of blank kind of, screen of no framing, no attempt to actually win engagement is a bit like beginning an e-learning course that you're designing and on the front page of the course maybe saying something like, okay, so this e-learning course is so boring and you're absolutely gonna hate it, but it's mandatory, so you might as well get on with it. It's that kind of frame, and that's what we're doing to learners. That's not how they expect content to be framed. So I want to show you an example of how we've actually taken something kind of from, like A to B to C in terms of framing it. So this is a collection of resources, so it's a typical sense, useful resources. Some organization has spent a lot of time putting some of this stuff together as optional resources. And it's a typical kind of folder structure. This is actually from a Moodle LMS. People might recognize it. This is kind of what it looks like. Now, what can we draw upon to frame this in a better way? Web resources is web resources. There's no other way we can kind of frame that. There's actually quite a lot of different elements that we can add to this to frame it in a way which is going to get learners to engage with that. The data about the most popular kind of bit of content in a certain area is already in your LMS. It's one of the most basic things that it captures. Google Analytics captures that quite easily. That helps because it's showing that other people are viewing this and therefore I want to view it. It's a social frame. Simple measures of, what we might call, gamification, kind of performance indicators, letting people know how well they've done, how much they've completed. Those are ways to frame content which work. And then just telling people what's been recently added as well, updates. Again, the reason why you go on Facebook all the time or you go on Twitter all the time is because it gets updated every second. If it only got updated once a week, you'd only visit it once a week. And there's no easy way to see that an LMS has been updated in this kind of sense, with just optional kind of resources. And if we kind of zoom out a level, then we're kind of thinking of imagining what our learning management system looks like as a learning experience network. And we're thinking of it more as a kind of dynamic dashboard. So each part of this is aiming to press a certain neurological trigger. And it's a kind of thing, the kind of user experience, which actually changes the way people think about content, So we're telling people what's most popular overall. We're letting them refresh that. In terms of the compliance learning that is on there, we're pushing that further by having kind of simple systems like badges to reward learners. And what we're really doing is completely changing the frame of how they experience that. It feels more like a network of content and a network of experience than a kind of solo, boring event, And a learning system has to look more like this, because at the moment we have learning management systems where learners are kind of logging in under sufferance 3 or 4 times a year to do compliance courses. And we have to address this, because otherwise, unless people are kind of a little bit more addicted to a platform and are going back and are finding out more, there's never going to be a platform to change anything in an organization. It's just going to be a platform to kind of tick the boxes. So the final principle that we need to look at applying is this idea of the endowment effect. So quite simply, this is the idea that we only take action if we feel personal ownership over that action. Effectively, as I've said, we are much more likely to act when we feel like something that we own is actually involved in that action. And, really exploiting this endowment effect is about two things, really. It's that sense of belonging to a team of people. It's about understanding, say, that, an induction course is not really a collection of content. It's actually, it's not a collection of policy documents. It's a group of people. Those are you're only going to read the policy documents if they say it's a good idea. And it's also about this idea that learners are producers above all else. So as human beings, we are productive entities. If you think of anything you do that you get some sense of satisfaction out of, it's because you're producing. You might be writing a text message, you might be cooking a meal, you might be writing a blog post, you might be commenting. It's all forms of production. And the platforms that are really, really good at achieving their objectives, places like Amazon, for example, they actually have two objectives. The first objective is obviously to get you to buy something, but that depends on successfully achieving the second objective, which is getting you to contribute some of your own time. So I might rate something, I might comment on something, and all of that is actually adding value to the stuff in Amazon because it makes it easier for the other person to go and buy it. And the thing that social networks like Amazon or like Facebook are very good at is getting us to do all of this stuff for free and then reselling that onto advertisers, of course. So it's quite interesting in this context how little opportunity that we give learners in conventional online learning experiences to reflect as an expressive form of activity, and that's absolutely integral to a learning experience, network. What people take away from a course is quite literally what they personally formulate. There's a quote by John Holt, which is, we can give learners lists, we can give them facts, we can give them diagrams, but we cannot give them mental structures. They must construct their own. And so the output that a learner gets from a course, it has to be something that they produced. And so building in this expressive activities and these points for reflection is absolutely vital. Just in the same way that when learners comment on something or they feed back to us or they rate something, that is extremely valuable to us. And we need the more of that, the better. It's not a waste of time. It's something that's going to be more beneficial because it's the only proof that they're taking ownership of something that's new. This is another example of if we're trying to achieve some significant behavioural outcomes in a learning experience. In this case, we are trying to get learners to mental health workers in the Republic of Ireland to actually take on a completely new way of working that pays much more attention to the human rights of the people they work with and their own kind of ability to control their own lives. And we've got some quite powerful scenarios in there. Then what we need to do is actually capture that moment, and at that point where they feel engaged, we need to get them to add to an action plan that they can print off. And it's quite a simple idea, really, but, if I'm a learner and I've been through a 45-minute course, then I need to come away with something that fits maybe on a couple of sides of A4 of stuff that I can actually do for next day. So what is this all for? What are we trying to achieve, aside from simply this idea of of learning and learners taking on new behaviours and new ideas? Well, in terms of an overall perspective from a platform, we need to think about, where do we end up by applying these principles? Why would we want to unmanage a learning management system and free it up to learner production in that way? Well, we've developed something that's based on kind of open source software, open source platforms. And the fundamental purpose, actually, is to solve an incredibly kind of common problem in organizations. And that problem is the knowledge problem. It's actually the problem of the fact that there is so much content sitting around, there's so much experience sitting around, and it's not easily accessible to people. It's not easy for them to understand what's relevant to me now. We also have situations where people are solving the same problem simultaneously in different departments and no one's sharing that. And that's why we call what we do in this area, we call it Saffron Share. It's kind of like being able to share is almost like the fundamental evolution of a platform like that. The point is that we want to kind of take learning experiences off the shelf and put them into action. Because actually, that's what changes organizations. This is actually what will improve an organization. The idea that the innovation or the idea which is going to save your organization, your business, which is going to take it to the next level or allow it survival, it's not something you know and it's not something you can plan. The point is that collaboration between people is what produces insight. The availability of the insight from those collaborations is what lays that foundation for those insights to be applied. And it's the application of those insights which is what changes organizations. And so in order to kind of create this space, something that's going to change an organization, you really do need to rethink, what kind of user experience you offer to learners. And that's one of the points I've been making with these 3 principles, is that user experience matters. It's not an optional extra. This is often the problem. A lot of the other LMS vendors here today, they understand that the reason people buy their products is for compliance purposes. And they might add in a little bit of kind of gamification here, a little bit of social learning here. But what they don't understand, because we are looking too insularly at our own industry, is that user experience is vital. It's a make or break moment. If you think about trying to apply the same principle of bounce rates to your LMS, if the learners didn't have to go there, what kind of bounce rate would you get? Maybe like 80, 90% of people would immediately click away. You need a place which is kind of searchable, which is elastic, keeps people coming back, and which can kind of produce its own emotional investment. And so in this case, let's come back to that example of an induction course. Again, there is an induction course here, but we don't join an induction course. That's just content. That's learning content which delivers some things we need to know. Most importantly, we join a particular team and a group of people. Far more relevant to my induction, perhaps, than a health and safety policy, which I need to read and confirm I agree, is what is someone else in my team experiencing right now? What events are going on? And if there's anything that I want you to take away from today, is in order to frame content properly, I want people to stop thinking that content and social is different. Because actually, based on the way we really interact in the world, they're inseparable. All content has an emotional weight based on its social relationship to us. And that's how we need to reimagine our courses, particularly something like an induction course and any kind of change management process. Really, organizational change is based on a collective experience of change. So we need to capture that collective experience in the way that it looks. So these are the kind of 3 principles we want to apply. But what's in it for kind of senior teams or from a talent kind of management perspective? What is it that by doing this we're trying to achieve? Just in the last couple of minute or two I've got, I want to talk about what all this data can do for an organization on a large scale. So this is a newish science in terms of online that's now being applied to Facebook social networking sites, email systems, historically to kind of transit systems. It's how Transport for London know what pain points are in terms of traffic. Social network analysis. Mapping out the relationships between people in a social network. Who are the main content creators? Who are the nodes of communication? When you send out a message, what route does that take? Who are the real communicators? Who are people who are blocks to the system? Kind of allowing you to model potential structures and, improve your content and courses. And so by acting on that information that we've gained by building in a user experience which actually encourages engagement, it's almost like we complete a virtuous circle. And this is the same kind of virtuous circle which produces the quality of our online experiences of something like Amazon. They get the engagement, they act on the data, and then they improve the experience again. And so to help us imagine the kind of uses of that, let's talk about 3 potential kind of uses of this social network analysis. So one of them is an international fast food restaurant that maybe have an interviewing process for store managers from their existing pool of employees, which is costing them £4,000 per candidate. Every interview, it costs them that much. Now, it's quite likely that in an enterprise social network of a community of these people, a learning community of these people, those who participate the most and are most vocal, those qualities, are also going to be quite good store managers or restaurant managers. And so you could use this to dramatically reduce the candidate pool and therefore save a lot of money. And I'm sure you are thinking about other forms of talent practice which could be benefited by this idea. Or how about a very major compliance requirement? Let's say new reporting regulations are rolled out in a very kind of fierce, regulatory environment. And a global bank has to understand how they need to prioritize a mix of training, some of which is more expensive, like face-to-face training, some of which is less intensive and cheaper. Well, if we really knew how people communicated learning messages to each other and how they related to each other in that network, then we'd be able to target the content at the right people. And, a final example would be, say, a university where the participation in courses might suffer very high dropout rates. To some extent, it's very difficult to know why that would be happening. But actually, by understanding the levels of engagement and interaction, we can kind of instantly see where the network is falling down. We can have engagement analytics. This kind of stuff is probably the revolution which is going to change learning and development the most in the way it has changed the world of marketing and the online world generally. It's those insights that we get from data and applying them. But if we're going to get data that's useful, we need to change what we do in terms of a learning platform from a learning management system to a learning experience network. I've definitely gone way over time, so if you'd like to ask any questions, I've got some takeaways. Final takeaways. Modern user experience design is about more than a home page. It's about how your learners feel, respond, and behave. Real-time data is your most powerful weapon, and it's probably already sitting there. And to just remember to start with less. Don't be bamboozled by one feature or another feature. Features don't mean anything if they're not linked to something that's beneficial to learners. So some kind of takeaways there. I've been Toby from Saffron Interactive. Our stand is just there, so if you want to, just over there, orange is pretty kind of the same. If you want to go over there and ask any kind of questions and talk to my colleagues and myself, that would be great. So thanks for your time, people.